Phase 2 of reopening starts tomorrow, and here's another set of guidelines to follow. This time it's about campaigning during a general election.
If an election is held during Phase 2, physical rallies will not be allowed. Instead, all political parties will be given extra airtime on television.
Announcing its preliminary campaign guidelines today, the Elections Department said walkabouts and door-to-door campaigning are allowed, but groups must not exceed 5 persons. They should also practice safe distancing measures such as wearing masks and minimizing physical contact like shaking hands. There should be no mixing between groups, and each group should remain at least 1 meter apart from another.
Special live streaming facilities will also be set up where candidates can hold e-rallies at specific time slots throughout the day. The ELD said these venues are optional and more details will be provided after the writ of election is issued. Candidates may campaign using live streaming outside of the provided venues and time slots.
Meanwhile, in a first, every candidate for the election will be given 3 minutes of airtime on national TV during the campaigning under new constituency political broadcasts. Each candidate contesting in an SMC will be given 3 minutes of airtime, while each set of candidates in a GRC will be given either 12 or 15 minutes of airtime, depending on whether it's a 4 or 5 person GRC. These constituency broadcasts will be aired on Mediacorp's Channel 5 and come on top of the two-party political broadcasts permitted for each party that will be aired on 19 TV and radio channels.
Under the new rules, the large crowds typically seen on nomination day and polling day are not allowed. The traditional thank you processions or victory parades after polling day are also not permitted. The ELD added the guidelines may be adjusted depending on the COVID-19 situation at the time the election is called.
We have news editor Zakir Hussain with us to discuss this further. Zakir, what do you make of these campaigning guidelines for the next general election? Did it come as a surprise given the circumstances?
Hi, Renato. I think no. It had been quite clear when the COVID-19 situation worsened and Singapore entered the circuit breaker and changes were made to the laws that the general election would not be an ordinary election. And I think adjustments would have to be made to take into account the fact that safe distancing regulations have to be in place. And also you don't kind of want, the nature of an election campaign is such that there's normally mass activity, lots of walkabouts, lots of meet and greeting of people. You don't want a situation that could allow, a possible resurgence or flaring up of COVID in Singapore. And so it would be quite a different election. And so I think the coming kind of together with phase 2 of reopening, walkabouts, door-to-door visits are allowed, although with limited, the advice is not to shake hands and so on. At the same time, I think what was striking was the fact that you suddenly have national platforms for all parties and all candidates to make their positions known in the absence of physical rallies and mass events.
Right, we'll talk about that a little later. But right now, Zakir, countries like South Korea, Iran, and Israel have held elections during the COVID-19 pandemic. How do Singapore's guidelines compare with the other countries?
Yeah, so I've not looked at those guidelines so closely, but I think the same precautions are in place. You before you go into a polling station, you should have some form of checking your temperature to make sure that you're well. And there's more spread out voting. So ELD last week announced that it would increase the number of polling stations to allow for more people to be able to vote. At the same time, I think voters are going to get time blocks indicating which times they should preferably go down to the voting stations to cast their vote. So there's you avoid basically having large crowds in the process.
Right.
Likewise, similarly, I think precautions. You wear gloves. You officials. You clean common areas more often. And I think with those precautions in place, the hope is that there's minimal risk of any spread.
Zakir, in the past, opposition parties talked about the difficulty in organizing rallies due to the lack of resources. Would e-rallies now solve that problem and level the playing field somewhat? Or do you see parties doubling down on walkabouts and door-to-door campaigning as it is their only chance of connecting with voters face-to-face?
I think you see more of both actually taking place. I think the circuit breaker period, you saw quite a number of parties, the PAP included, but also a number of opposition parties, actually organize, Zoom sessions, e-broadcasts, to basically get their message across. And I think those have always been in place, and those will continue to be in place. But at the same time, I think there's no substitute for door-to-door campaigning, to leave your flyer, leaflet out, or even to visit voters at markets and coffee shops. Yeah, so you can't be in a group of 5, but transient contact, you pass your leaflets to people who may be walking around and so on. That at least lets voters know that you're there, you're standing in that constituency, and get the chance for the candidates to explain what they're about. At the same time, I think it's significant that the constituency political broadcast, this is a new format that's come up this election. So previously, parties only had national airtime on free-to-air TV. If they were contesting, say, a number of seats, 6 seats, and they'd get the airtime proportionate to the number of candidates they were fielding. Now, a slate of candidates in a GRC, or even a single candidate in a single seat, will have a minimum of 3 minutes to directly address voters on free-to-air TV. And that clip will probably also be available for catch-up viewing, for them to broadcast and so on. So all of a sudden, in a way, you get a national platform. And for a party that's contesting a GRC, a 4-man or a 5-man GRC, you get 12 or 15 minutes to put your points across. And these should, I guess, be specific to the constituency you're contesting in. That's a fair bit of airtime, and I think you can do it in all 4 languages as well. So in a way, you could say it's a bit of a leveling of the playing field in that respect.
Right. Well, it's pretty clear that this upcoming election will be quite a departure from the typical elections in the past. Apart from disallowing physical rallies, large crowds typically seen on nomination day and polling day will also not be allowed to gather. So, Zakir, do you think these will affect voters' sentiments in any way? For one thing, the overall atmosphere will be very much diminished already.
Yep, you could say that, but I think a lot of the supporters of the crowds that are present on nomination day or on polling nights are your kind of loyal fans, diehard supporters of parties, and it's true that they won't be able to gather with flags and banners and so on. I guess there's nothing to prevent them gathering online though, or organizing activities in smaller groups. I think given the climate, you could say it also brings down the cost of contesting or campaigning somewhat. You no longer have to put out these banners or organize transport for supporters to gather and so on. And I think given the circumstances this election is being carried in, maybe that's not too unusual.
Right, well, thank you so much, Zakir, for taking time to speak with us. We were speaking to news editor Zakir Hussain on the changes to the campaigning guidelines for the upcoming general election.